Okay, so that's it. So first of all, Shchukin, I'm sure that most of you had, if not all of you, had never heard of Shchukin. And I was introduced to him actually when I did the big series on Picasso, because he's going to be a very big collector of Picasso. So he enters into the series of people that approach Picasso. He's a fascinating figure, very modest in many ways, but so we're going to discover him. You see him on the left, a photograph of him, and on the right, a painting by Xan Kron, made in 1915 of him. When I prepared the talk, I was hesitating on how to show you all the beautiful works that he collected. And at first I had all the Monets, and then the guy and the Noir, and go on with Cézanne, Gauguin, and so on. And then fortunately, I showed you the catalog of the Louis Vuitton exhibition, and found a timeline with detailed acquisition. And I thought, this is so much more interesting. So I reshuffled all my slides and show you the progression on how he bought. And you really get into his psyche and see how he evolves in front of art, the more he discovers, being quite conservative at first, and at the end, actually acquiring a lot of cubist paintings of Picasso that he couldn't even understand. But he thought he knew it was important. So I think this is going to be a more interesting way. Let me see if I can do as I've done before. Let me see. No, it's not this one. Sorry, it's subtitle. Yes. Hopefully it works. I put subtitles. Don't forget, last names and locations are not well transcribed. The regular language, no problem, but don't, if you see terrible names, not my fault. I didn't type them. So a little bit of history. We go back all the way to Peter I, because he's really the one that turned the culture, the Russian culture, towards the West, and really was trying to modernize the country. Three below him, the descendant, she's not a direct descendant, her husband was, but he only reigned for a year. So Catherine II, and we talked about her at length last time, is going to really modernize the sort, the way of thinking of the Russian, and very much turn them to the West. Actually, French was spoken at the court, not Russian. And that's going to go on all the way to 1807, so when Napoleon invades Russia, a little later than that. Then they are so angry at him that they forbid French to be spoken at the court. The reign of Alexander I, who becomes Tsar in 1801, is going to run all the way to 25, is going to be the encounter with Napoleon. At first, he was kind of okay with him, and then very quickly turns around and fights him. The importance of Alexander and Napoleon is Napoleon, as you know, had looted a lot of art from Italy and from the German countries and so on. And Alexander is going to go very quickly to Paris, meet Eugénie de Beauharnais, the first wife of Napoleon, and buy from her a whole collection of paintings that used to belong to the Dresden collection, and go back to Russia with it, together with all the cameos that Josephine had collected. In 1814, Napoleon abdicates and is sent to Elba Island, comes back very quickly in 1815, but then loses that terrible loss at Waterloo in Belgium, and he abdicates a second time, and he's sent to St. Helena, where he died in 1821. In importance about Napoleon, because he's before he becomes emperor, he was really considered as an example for the young Germans and some of the young Russian of a guy that had some very liberal ideas and very constructive ideas. He's going to go totally against the grain when he names himself emperor. But before that, he's going to change a lot the culture and the politics in the German states, particularly. During the 19th century in Russia, we see a current that's going to put against each other the Westernizers and the Slavophiles. So there are two camps, one that are looking at the West, and you have the ones that just are very nationalistic and want to keep the old value of Russia. In 1861, finally, what Catherine wanted but could never do, they emancipate the Russian serfs. During Alexander III, between 1881 and 94, there's Russification. So they really go back in a very nationalist way. And then we have finally the last Tsar, who's going to reign between 1894, sorry for the hyphen there, and 1918, when he will, with his family, be killed. It's Tsarskoye Skelo. In 1905, we have a first revolution that's going to come out with an idea of the equivalent of a parliament, the Duma. This is going to change quite a bit. And for many, that was great. That was a change. Now the people would have something to say for the country. It would not be that enlightened autocrat. But unfortunately, that's going to kind of fade. We have the war, First World War between 1914 and 18. And then at the end of the war, in 1917, we have that terrible revolution in Russia. They're very unhappy with all the mistakes that were made at the end of the First World War. And of course, we have a first kind of a soft revolution, and then the Bolsheviks come in, and it's the end of the Tsar regime, but also the beginning of a lot of problems. And we'll see how Schukin is going to live through that. Just a map to show you, this is actually Europe, and what you see surrounded in, I forgot my pointer again. What you see surrounded in red is actually the possession of Napoleon, the way Europe looked under Napoleon. So you see how that young general that started in his early 20s is going to invade most of Europe. There we are. So you see all that line surrounding. This was the way it looked. And of course, against which the rest of Europe is going to fight. Now, the Romanov dynasty, we saw it all the way to Catherine. I'm trying to find her down here. Alexander, Peter III and Catherine, yeah. So this is where Catherine was. And we go through these, many of them are going to be assassinated. The others die very young, as you can see. And we finish with Nicholas II down here. So the time of the life of Sergei is going to be covered pretty much by Alexander III and Nicholas II. That's the time of his life. So what were the art and culture at the end of the 19th century? It is the silver age of Russian culture, with the beginning of the Russian avant-garde, which was quite interesting, very different to what was done in Western Europe. But it's going to finally fuse with many movements, especially the Italian futurism, the different movements. And we always have to look at first literature, because that's how it starts. It starts with literature that shows an influence on the arts. So Russian symbolism, here some of the artists, Mikhail Vrubel, Alexander Benoy, Vasily Kandinsky. Benoy was one of the people employed by Diaghilev in the Ballet Russe, in the Russian ballet in Paris. It's going to do a lot of the costume and the staging. Acmeism is a poetic movement in the early 20th century that emphasized clarity and precision over the vagueness of symbolism. So it's a kind of a reaction against symbolism. And then we have the Russian futurism with Natalia Goncharova and her husband Mikhail Larionov, David Boryuk, and Kazimir Malevich. Among these are the biggest names. But we see also a rise of collectors in Moscow. We have to look at it. Moscow was not the capital, St. Petersburg was. The court was in St. Petersburg. And the court was made of mostly aristocrats. And so they had a lot of money and they were collecting. Though in the early 19th century, they don't collect as much, only have their portraits made by important painters. But in Moscow, we have the rise of merchants. And we have a whole series of people that become extremely rich and form that high bourgeoisie that exists in Moscow. And they want to emulate what is done in St. Petersburg and start collecting. And they have far more money, actually, than the aristocrats in St. Petersburg. Also, because of their job, if you want, because they are merchants, they travel extensively to Western Europe, to North Africa, to India, and are in contact with other cultures as well as with what is new in Paris. And that's going to start a lot of the collection. So many collectors, and the generation before Schukin is the Tretiakov, including Pavel Tretiakov and his brother Sergei, Pavel, who gave his collection, as well as the collection of his brother who died before him, to the state, and that became the Tretiakov Museum, but mostly based on Russian culture, has fabulous collection of icons, but also of older Russian art. And then the whole generation of the Peredvizhniki, the ambulance, the ones that were going around Russia to show the contemporary art, like Ilya Repin that we talked about before, and Ayvazovsky that we will talk next year about. So they emulate the aristocrat, and I mentioned the fact that they are going to, Tretiakov is going to give his whole collection to the state. So who was Sergei Shchukin? He was born in 1854 in Moscow, one of 10 children. And we have to look at it. He was born 50 years after Catherine's death, Catherine II, to just give you an idea on how the world is going to change from the time Catherine dies and when Sergei is born. He is the son of Ivan Vasilievich Schukin, a self-made Moscow merchant. He had started a big trading company, Schukin and Sons, that became one of the largest manufacturing and wholesale companies in Russia. He was, among the brothers, the most fragile. He stammered. He had a big head, and people were really concerned that he was not going to survive. So when his brothers were sent out to some colleges, boarding school around Germany, because this is typically where they would be sent, very strict school, he wasn't sent there because they were fearing that he wouldn't survive the regime over there. So he stayed at home and was educated among women, and they say, but they was given very good tutors, and by his own will, with calisthenics and vegetarian diet, he came out much more healthy, and was able, with a lot of tutoring, to lose his stammering, except when he was very nervous, then it would come back up. But he was able to work on that. He finally, of all the brothers, he's the one who became the successor of his father in the business, and became so crafty at doing it. He became a shareholder in many factories, banks, and insurance companies, that he was nicknamed the Minister of Commerce of Moscow, because he was so good at it. So what we find is he's just born at a time where Russia is shifting, and where people are kind of mocking the Russian collectors. He's going to prove them wrong. Of the 6 brothers that he had, 4 of them were known collectors. So Piotr, who is the older one, was collecting Russian ancient art and Impressionist masterpiece. He's the one who is going to introduce him to the art dealers in Paris. Sergei himself will, in 16 years, will collect 258 paintings of realist, primitives, impressionist, post-impressionist, and mostly Matisse and Picasso. Dmitri Shchukin will collect all masters, and at his death, his collection will go to the Pushkin Museum and makes literally the core of all the ancient European art that is in the Pushkin. And then Ivan Schukin, who was the young one and who went to settle in Paris and became really the core of the Russian colony in Paris, was collecting prints and books and some paintings, but also helped his brother. Sometimes he would buy for Sergei, he would buy some of the paintings. In 1884, at the age of 30, Sergei married Lydia Koreneva, who was the daughter of the president of the executive committee of the Donetsk coal company. She was 19. In 1886, she gave birth to a son. They named Ivan for his grandfather, and the grandfather said, "Yuppie," and he gave them the palace that you see there, who was a summer residence of the Trubetskoy family, a ruined aristocratic family. And this is going to be the place where he's going to hang all his collection. After the first son, he's going to got 2 older sons and a daughter, Ekaterina. And he is a contemporary photograph of the Trubetskoy mansion that was designed by Joseph Beauvais. So it was it's funny to say a summer palace, because Moscow is not particularly summer place. It's very continental in climate, so it can be very warm in the summer. But this is the way they called it. And it had a really interesting series of salons, one next to each other, that were perfect to hang a lot of paintings. And we'll see a large amount of the pictures of what it was. So when Sergei, traveling for business with his brother Piotr, came to Paris, there were 2 particular places where he would see art. The first one was the Salon. And the Salon d'Automne that started in 1903 was one of these salons that was outside of the grand salon where you go through a jury and so on. These were not juried. People would say, "Are we hanging the paintings there?" And they would display. They were actually in remote places. They were not in the beautiful Louvre Palace, but they were in the Palais, the Petit Palais. And so they had many rooms. And here we see one of the paintings that is actually going to buy, which is a Cézanne. So starting in 1903, every year, until quite late, the Salon d'Automne. And a good idea to call it the Salon d'Automne, so Salon of the Fall. It was taking place in the fall, would last for a month, and would benefit from all the new works that had been painted during the summer. And so all the painters would come with their newly painted works and hang them there. And then he also looked at dealers. And the most important at that time is Paul Durand-Ruel, that was introduced to him by Piotr. That art dealer is literally going to shape the art market of his day. He started really small, went twice through almost bankruptcy, and then finally came up because he concentrated on the Barbizon school, which preceded the Impressionist. And when he started with the Impressionist, nobody wanted the Impressionist. People didn't like Impressionist painting. And it's literally by networking from Paris. He started a gallery in London, and the Britons much preferred the Impressionists than the French were. And with the help of Marie Cassatt, he's going to branch out to the United States, and the American market opens their arm big to Impressionism. And so this is what's going to make Impressionism appreciated by many more people. And the French looking at it say, maybe we should look at that again. And then finally in France, they appreciated Impressionism. But finally, at the end of his career, he would have acquired more than 5,000 Impressionist works and sold them around. So he died very rich. And here's a picture, by the way, showing him with the straw hat with Monet at just along the Nymphaeas. And Monet with his second wife and his favorite stepdaughter, Suzanne. I love these period pictures. So just to see, what he was facing when he came. If you want to talk about contemporary painters, I drew these two blue lines. That's the time where he collected. Mm. And so you can see the slice of who he met. He met Monet in Giverny. Cézanne died shortly after he started collecting. Gauguin, even before, Van Gogh had died, never met him. But he's going to become quite friendly with Matisse, who is going to invite eventually to Moscow to hang his own pink room. He's going to meet Picasso. In Derain, we have very little information on that, but he's going to buy many of his works. So one of the very first painting, that he bought is that Pissarro painting. He went to Durand-Ruel, to the art dealer, with his brother Piotr, who bought another Pissarro and another painting. And so the first painting that Sergei bought was the Avenue de l'Opéra, works that were actually geared in that kind of venue by Durand-Ruel. Durand-Ruel was going after Pissarro and after Renoir, both painters, because they were painting things that people didn't want. And so he told them, he said, if you want to sell, you have to change your topics. And so, for example, Pissarro is going to make paintings of the new city of Paris. Don't forget, Paris is brand new at that time. It has been rebuilt between 1852 and 1870 and past. So Paris is a new city, and they're very proud of it. And so that kind of painting is going to sell. And with Renoir, he's the same thing. He said, your little landscape outside in the countryside, we're not interested in. And so he literally directs them to a kind of a channel where they can sell. So it is actually very typical of what is happening now with galleries, painting galleries, where they are very influential on young artists and saying, stay there because that sells. If you move out of there, most probably you're not going to sell anymore. Mm. So they have an influence on what's happening. Then he buys a Courbet, who precedes the Impressionist. and he's painting this chalet, so the little chalet in the mountain in 1874. He's actually in exile in Switzerland after one of the revolution in 70, where they demolished the Vendôme column. And Courbet is going to be arrested and penalized very heavily for that, and then sent in exile to Switzerland, where he's going to end up his life ruined, literally. And then he meets the Manet style. The Monet, sorry, Claude Monet. And that particular painting, the rocks at the Belle-Île. Belle-Île is a lovely island outside of Brittany, and that he particularly loved. And he made actually a whole series of this painting with different time of days and different reflection of light and so on. This one is actually going to be exchanged for one that he had before that was not as intense as the one that you see here. He loves that painting, and he sees more and more of the Monet. And finally, he's going to ask to meet Monet. And right away, then he goes away with 2 paintings and discuss with him about some choices also that he wants. In Russia at that time, in 1899, we have some organization called the Mir Iskustva. I'm sorry, my Russian accent is horrible, but it's the world of art, literally, that is founded by Alexander Benoit, that we talked about, Léon Bakst, also a painter and stage designer, set designer, and Sergei Diaghilev, who is the big impresario of the Ballet Russe, who's going to bring all these people to France and start the Ballet Russe in France together with Benoit and Bakst. They are reacting against the old ideas of the academy and want to move into the modern world, if you want. And so in 1899, they put together a collection of paintings that they bring from France and have that very large exhibition in Moscow. And you see to the right, that's the front page of the program. So the critiques after seeing all these new works are really interesting. So you have on one side, Vasily Stasov that led the charge in the stock exchange news, La Cour des Miracles, the slums, denouncing the exhibition as an excretion of manners and vicious muck. What gracious and pure Esmeralda will come to our aid, who will save us from this basket of crabs, monsters, and degenerates, and who will deliver us from their disgusting claws. So that's the idea of the conservative side. The response by Benoit, who is one of the promoter of the thing, is a perplexity bordering on horror, seems to seize all those who see a painting in this school, meaning Impressionism, for the first time. Can it be that amid this senseless disorder of lines and colors, sincere and objective people can actually discover light, sunshine, life, the delicate wonder of color, even poetry? It is only by educating and developing our taste and by entering more deeply into works that have so astonished us that we will discover beneath what we at first take for ugliness, a divine spark that can set our hearts aflame. So you see the 2 camps. You have the people that are moving forward and people that want to stay on the statu quo. And so we go on in 1899, after buying that first Pissarro and the Monet, he goes back to Durand-Ruel and buys 2 Renoir. But that's going to be it. He's not going to stay with Renoir. We have these 2 paintings, Girls in Black. At that time, Renoir, he's still in the dark period. And so he's okay, but not too much. And then he goes back to Monet. And actually, this one was bought by his young brother, Ivan. that buys that very early study of the lilacs in the sun, with people sitting in the shade there. He bought that for 8,000 francs on Sergei's behalf, which makes $170,000 nowadays. So it wasn't given. He also likes Maurice Denis, who is a symbolist. Very different styles. You can see very muted colors, always kind of behind the screen, makes it almost blurred. But he likes the symbolic side of Denis. In 1900, there is the big World Fair in Paris. And you see an aerial view of the Exposition Universelle. The Eiffel Tower had been built for the previous World Fair and stands in the very middle. So you can see all the, everything was taking place around here. So all these were the pavilions where things were hanging. And on the other side, you had different smaller buildings, but they were typical of each culture. So you had the Russian pavilion, you had the French, not French, the German pavilion, the Brits, the Chinese or whatever. At that exhibition, he sees a tapestry that he falls in love with by Burns-Jones, who is a pre-Raphaelite. And he orders another copy of that same tapestry and is going to have center place here. Again, we have to realize that Sergei's father, Ivan, was what is called the Old Believers. They were part of an Orthodox, I can't say sect, but a kind of a particular groups that were very religious. And there is always that underlying belief and faith in Sergei. So very often he likes that kind of painting. This is a tapestry, it's not a painting. And then he meets Monet in 1900 in Giverny. He goes to his place. They seem to like each other. And on the spot, he's going to buy the nymphas, the white water lilies that you see here. He loved the garden and then the pool of covered with the water lilies. And the year after, he goes back to Giverny and buys from Monet the Rouen Cathedral at the end of the day. For those of you that don't know, Monet went to Rouen in 1894 and settled in an apartment across from the cathedral, and then observed that the cathedral was changing color depending on the time of day. And as he could not just paint one because it was going away very quickly, that kind of color, he set 6 or 7 easels with canvases, and he would go from one early morning to end of morning, noon, afternoon, and evenings. And so he would just jump from one canvas to the other and make that whole series. The Rouen Cathedral is a particularly beautiful cathedral. It's a late Gothic cathedral with very deep carving like lace. In 1902, he's going to buy that painting painted the year before by Monet in Véteuil. Monet used to live in Véteuil by that time in 1901. He was living in Giverny, but came back. It was kind of a pilgrimage. This is where his first wife, Camille, died. And so he went back to Véteuil in 1901 and painted that lovely small town that's around Paris. And then he bought a second Rouen Cathedral that shows the full sunlight, again, one of that series. The same year, he bought some Degas. This is the dancer in the photographer's studio. And the year after, bought the Danseuse en Bleu, so the Dancers in Blue. That is, as you can see, a different color scheme because it's made of pastel on paper. It's not an oil. In 1903, he bought another Monet, the Falaise près de Dieppe, so it's up north again. And you can see that by 1897, he has sometimes these very muted colors. But he discovers a new painter, Cézanne. Cézanne has actually will die in 1906. So he will never meet him because by that time Cézanne is in the south, in his native Aix-en-Provence. But he likes his style. And so you can see that evolution from very conservative. Now he's looking at literally the father of the avant-garde with Cézanne. And still life is also a topic that he likes. He will buy altogether 51 still lifes during his time of collection from different painters. This is one turning point for Cézanne, where his first paintings were rather dark. Here you have that beautiful light on the napkin that is, or the tablecloth that is folded there in the middle. And then he meets another dealer, Ambroise Vollard. And Ambroise Vollard was one of the first one to discover Picasso and Matisse. And so here you have a photograph of Vollard in front of a Picasso painting of Evocation, which is one of his early paintings before even the Blue period. He was born in Saint-Denis in the Réunion and studied jurisprudence in France. He received his degree, and then during his studies, he became immediately an amateur merchant and started collecting. And by 1893, had established his own art gallery, Rue Lafitte, in the center of the Parisian market for contemporary art. And he is going to almost concentrate on Cézanne at the very beginning. And this is where then he will have Manet and Gauguin and Van Gogh. In 1939, he will meet an untimely death in a car accident, by the way. So in 1904, Schukin discovers Gauguin. And that's a real discovery. And he's going to be absolutely crazy about Gauguin, about his colors. He loves his colors. And when we talk about the Trubetskoy Palace, you have to imagine that was kind of a Rococo palace with pale pink and pale yellow and dusty rose and dusty blue or whatever. And he never changed that. But then he bought the Gauguin and he just put them all together in these rooms with these very faded colors. And he loved it. He loved it so much. There are going to be what he called his iconostasis in his dining room. And the iconostasis is what you have in Orthodox churches, is that big screen that you have between the altar and the believers with all the paintings of saints next to one another. And for him, he's going to create the same with Gauguin. We'll see that later. Another of his paintings, landscape, horse on the road, all on the Tahiti time period. Goes on with Cézanne, with that beautiful bouquet of flowers, rather large painting where literally the flowers just jump at your face. And another Cézanne, the Shrove Tuesday, so Pierrot and Harlequin. And he goes on with a few Monets. This is the House of Parliament with seagulls painted in 1904, where you see the Westminster, the Big Ben and the Westminster Abbey with a few things. And there he's influenced by Turner. where he uses that kind of mistiest atmosphere. He's also going to buy from a German dealer this study for the luncheon on the grass. That was the most, let's say, an early, incredibly pretentious painting for Monet, who decided if he wanted to be known, he needed a huge painting. And so he made a huge painting of the same subject, this being the study. But unfortunately for him, he was struggling economically at that time, and they had to leave the painting with the owner of the apartment where he lived while he moved out. And by the time he came back, the guy had cut his painting in many pieces because it was unfinished and kept only the good parts. And mostly it's these three figures and then and that part, and the rest was disappeared. But with this painting that was bought by Shchukin, we have an idea of what it looked before. And it was absolutely adored by the new generation of artists in Moscow when it arrived. And I put here the comment by Benoit. We dare not dream that a painting like this, Monet, will ever be brought to St. Petersburg or Moscow. Nevertheless, the day will come when history, which always lags behind life, will view such work as great masterpieces. And then he bought a few more Monets, less particular, but this one is interesting, is the beginning of the haystacks. What you see at the bottom is actually his house. So this is Giverny, and he had these fields behind him, and this is where he's going to have the inspiration for the haystacks, but this is a miniature haystack compared to the rest. And then the meadows at Giverny. And here is an idea on how the Monet room was hung. And so you have an idea, and you can see he doesn't pay attention on how he hangs the painting. They are already kind of iconostasis. They against each other. Sometimes the frame almost superposed because they were so close to each other. And so you have an idea, and what you see at the back there through the door is Matisse. So you would have that series of salons that were each dedicated to the big collection that he had. Let's take 5. We have some water and some coffee there and some biscuits, and then we'll move to 1905 because that's an important year for him.
So, Anne, was the series of Rouen the first of the Monet series? Was that the first time you took a subject and developed?
It's actually, it's one of the first, but he's going to do the poplars.
He's going to do the poplars, yeah.
He's going to do the poplars, and there's another one that he the haystacks. So these are the 3 big ones. And I think they come almost contemporary to each other. It's really, he's inspired by the Japanese when he does that. Because he found that the Hoshige and Hokusai had these series showing different time of days and season. Those paintings that he by the cathedral day, do they all of them and are they all experienced all over? I need a list. Okay, yes, there you are, Mark. Same author, the library. Chosen made. I will look.
Another book, but what's happened about?
Well, I get my thinking, you know. Slowly pronounces my now. I know, I was wondering. It's a society.
So amazing, huh, to see that.
World of art is just enormous, isn't it?
And you know, you would say, oh, this was early. No, at that time, the refreshments are starting to be known, so the prices are going up. You would say otherwise, for $5,000, I buy it.
The lady called me back, and I just called her back, so it's all set for you there.
Okay, good.
So everything's set, and then we got Bud Night down, and we registered it was married. And so she couldn't. Sorry, I was selling like crazy this morning. Yeah, that's the one we're at. That's so settled, so. You know, I'm. When you're driving. So it looks. I want to tell you. Yeah, oh, I have seen that. It's a wonderful experience. It's like 6 hours. That's interesting. This is great. This is great. It's a nice thing too. I was just looking forward to today. What's the museum named after him? No. Did
No.
he never set one up?
No, but you will, I will go through the history of the museum. Okay, if we can Take a seat. Thank you, Patsy.
Yours gets a light.
Okay.
That's his home.
Thank you, Patsy. So we go on after Monet. As we said, he's already looking at two new painters, Cézanne and Gauguin. And Gauguin, he's really smitten by the colors. This is what he loves. He is, interestingly enough, he's repelled by nudity. He doesn't want nudity for a very good reason. That is starting in 1906. He's going to welcome some children of two dead brothers. And so there are two young girls among them. And he doesn't want them to be exposed to nudity. And so he's going to stay away, except if it's an allegory. And that's the old-fashioned way. You know, you could have a nude woman as long as it was Venus, it was okay. As long if it was a prostitute, no. So it's a kind of an interesting way of looking at things. So here is a painting by Van Gogh that he bought in 1905. And this is the time where Van Gogh was, Van Gogh, when he was with Gauguin in Haarlem. And it's a painting of people around the Roman arena in Haarlem. It's a beautiful town where you have lots of Roman ruins, including the arena there. And you see people still in their traditional costumes. But unfortunately for him, he's facing dramatic years. In 1905, his teenage son, Sergei, disappears. The body will be only found in April 1906 in the river Moskva after the thaw. In 1907, his wife died from fulminant cancer, feminine cancer, as they call it at that time, but she was taken away very quickly. In 1907, he draws a will to bequeath his collection to the Tretyakov Gallery after his death, which is not going to be realized because the revolution will happen and it's not going to be his decision. In 1908, his younger brother, Ivan, deeply in debt, commits suicide. And that's a really interesting way. He was absolutely swamped by debts. He had spent enormously a moment. And I have here the story of how it happened. So the evening of the Russian New Year, January 13th, 1908, has passed as usual. Ivan Shchukin, true to himself, charmed with his Muscovite friendliness, he seemed in a good mood. He sparkled with wit and was attentive to the slightest desire of his guests. At the end of the meal, he surprised them by offering them some pieces from his collection for a symbolic price. The guests stayed until late into the night. On January 14th, Ivan did not answer anyone. The next day, the door was forced open and his lifeless body was found. The autopsy concluded that he was dead by suicide by poisoning. In 1910, his younger son, Grigory, who was suffering from acute migraine syndrome, took his own life. So imagine in so many years, he lost all people that were so close to him. It was really painful. And what we see then, it's a shift in taste, especially after the death of his wife, who he really adored. And he will remarry, but not before 1912. And that's another topic, and we'll talk about it. Here is to show he traveled extensively. He went to Egypt, and it's really interesting to see he is with his three of his kids, his wife, himself, and then I think she's and the sister-in-law are on mules, but the children are on camels behind. after the death of his wife, he's going to go all the way down to Nubia and Eritrea. And so in 1906, sorry, he's actually traveling with his wife to Egypt when he learned that they found the body of his son in the river, and they came back in a hurry. 1906, he buys Matisse Dish and Fruit, and you can see his taste towards still life, but also that beautiful, the Luxembourg Gardens. And he noticed, for example, he compares that to a painting by Gauguin. He said, Matisse has looked at Gauguin when he painted that. And up to a point, the colors are very Gauguin-like. And then one of the last paintings by Cézanne of the Mont Sainte-Victoire, he made that this is a mountain next to Aix-en-Provence where Cézanne lived, that he painted continuously. And you can really see the evolution of his style just by the way he paints the mountain. And by this time, he's starting to look at the geometric shapes of all the houses that he can see in the vegetation, where they're now starting to show more planes than just the brushwork, the regular brushwork. Even the mountain is starting to show some of these planes. And more Gauguin. In 1906 still. And then this one, it's interesting. He kept it in a dark room because of the nudity until Gauguin became so famous that he thought, okay, this is becoming an allegory. In 1906, he's going to meet the Stein family, the Gertrude and Leo Stein, who were the ones that discovered Matisse and Picasso, and who were an American family of German origin that moved to Paris at first, and then Leo is going to move to Florence, Italy, but Gertrude is going to stay in Paris. And they're going to be the movers of the avant-garde. They had salons at their place. It was not a huge, they were not in a huge mansion. They had a large apartment, and Leo had his side, Gertrude had her side. They were competing sometimes on the same paintings, but they were collecting heavily. And they're really the one that's going to put Picasso and Matisse in front of each other. And as they say, as the North and South Pole, because they were so different. So Gertrude is here, by the way. And that's her partner. We can't see, what's his name there? That's Leo. And then there was another brother, but who wasn't collecting as much. And then the son of her other brother. Just to give you an idea, this is her apartment, part of her apartment. And you can see painting by Picasso, and including the famous portrait of Gertrude Stein by Picasso, but some of his early rose period and blue period. And then they're going to be a little disturbed by Cubism, as mostly people were at that time. But this is the kind of, you know, collection that they put together. By 1907, after the death of his wife, he decided to travel to St. Catherine Monastery at the foot of the Sinai, and really goes there in grief. It's a beautiful compound with a church the old-fashioned way. You have no electric lights. It's all the lights that hang in a very dark room, full of, as I say, icons, and the old liturgy too. So it's really very different. And of course, the landscape, you see the Mount Sinai just next to it. It's incredible. And so he will go there, comes back through Paris, but 1907, he won't buy anything. That's really going to be his year of recovery. He will then, in 1908, meet Henri Matisse. And it starts with the painting La Joie de Vivre of Matisse, who is a very large painting, a turning point in his career, which is a lovely painting showing people enjoying life, but it's very much of an allegory. And he wanted the painting, but the Stein bite under his nose. And he's really eager to have something similar. So he asked to meet Matisse. And he sits down with him and start discussing what he wants to buy from him. So again, there we have somebody who moves a little bit the style of somebody else. So more Gauguin. And that's interesting. Apparently, when he brought these paintings to Moscow, they had gentlemen evenings where they were playing cards. And they were playing cards in the dining room where the Gauguin were displayed. And the guys were laughing dead in looking at this. They just did not understand. And more here, the Monks of Maria. And then 1908, I think this is the last one he's going to buy. The cueillette des fruits, so gathering fruits. No, and that's right, he has still two more. So a still life, which is not very often seen with Gauguin, but with, they're not sunflowers, but look like big daisies. I know sunflowers in the chair, but don't look like sunflower to me. And then the harvest, the men picking fruit. And finally, the elle se nommait Weihnacht. No, and one more. You see, never finished. Yes, scene of temptation, life. What really inspired him in Gauguin, you have to remember that his specialty is textiles. And he buys textiles in India, in Persia, in Africa. And for him, it has something to do with the beautiful colors of these textiles that he sees there. And I give you some examples here of the kind of ikat fabric that he would buy. And so you had these very colorful fabrics that he could find in these areas. And then, as I mentioned, literally, he hung his Gauguin as an iconostasis. So on the left, you have an iconostasis in the Orthodox Church with the door. And when that door opens, you have the altar. And only, for example, people that get married can go through the door. And the whole ceremony, they go around the altar and have the whole ceremony when they get married. But otherwise, nobody gets in, just the priest. And here's the dining room where he hangs all his Gauguin. And so you see all of them put next to each other, just like an iconostasis. Just a few more Van Gogh. Memory of the Garden at Eton. And Lilac Bush. And he goes back to Cézanne. So it's really interesting. So you see how he's now moved away totally from the Impressionist. And he is now in the post-Impressionism. Cézanne, the famous man smoking a pipe that was displayed in the 1904 Salon d'Automne. And then the portrait of a Dr. Felix Ray, who was the doctor who took care of Van Gogh in Arles when he had his first problem of delirium and when he cut his ear. And Felix Ray hated the portrait and so refused it when Van Gogh painted it. And then a self-portrait of Gauguin. And then he starts buying Matisse. And here's the past in the Bois de Boulogne. That again, he compares to many paintings of Gauguin. So he says that one and the one before, that they really are inspired by Gauguin on Matisse. The only nude that's going to go into his collection in full view is this one by Matisse, which I think is really harsh, but it's a nude black and gold. So that one found a place but more still lives, many still lives. And I'm not even showing you all the Matisse and the Picasso, because there are too many, but just to give you an idea of what he enjoys. This is after a trip to Spain, where Matisse went. These two are very typical of what he did with that red and black carpet. And then the famous Harmony in Red, which is one of the masterpieces of Matisse, where you can see, the tablecloth gets lost in the wall decoration, and even the window, you don't know if it's a decoration or if you look through the garden. But that's very much that pivotal moment of Matisse when he gets to full maturity. Here, the game of balls. So this is actually not bocce the Italian way, but it's what we call in French a cochonnet. Cochonnet, where you have a series of metallic balls, and then you have a tiny little one in wood, and you throw the little one in wood, and then you have to go as close as possible to that little one when you play. In the south of France, you have people still nowadays play that for hours. But it's turned into an allegory because you have these young men are in the nude, which normally they wouldn't be, but that's the way of doing. And then Matisse takes him to Picasso's Bateau Lavoir studio. And this is going to be a shock. You can imagine what he sees. First of all, the Bateau Lavoir was already a shock in itself, because as I described, when this was a series of small studios, you had one sink on the whole floor and one toilet for 2 floors. Of artists that lived in there. It was really totally la bohème, just 100%. And he meets Picasso and definitely finds in him somebody who actually he sympathized at that time because of his grief. He is in such pain at that time that he finds in him that kind of evil person that he can almost comprehend through his grief. And that's interesting. So you have Matisse, who is the cult of color. Matisse is all color and joy. He's an eternal optimist. Matisse goes through all kinds of problems. He's always optimistic. But Picasso is just the opposite. He's a very dark mind. And Picasso is the king of the line. He's never going to be a colorist, very rarely. But the line is everything for Picasso. He will end up buying 51 Picasso during the rest of his collecting days. He starts with the femme assise, the sitting woman. And this is in 1908. He's already done the Demoiselle d'Avignon by that time. He's in the middle of the Cubic period, but this is still different than the Volard that we will see later. The femme à l'éventail, woman with a fan, it's quite interesting. He bought it, set it in a corner, found it repulsive, but found himself coming back regularly to watch it and trying to understand it. And I would say this is a soft cubist compared to other things that he did. And then look at the color for Matisse, the view of Collioure, where he's singing. You can hear the birds singing almost, looking at that. even here with the nymph and satyr. And because it's an allegory, it's admitted. And other Cézanne, the lady in blue, that it's a rather large painting, and he put it quite prominently. But then Matisse and his still lifes, you know, that one with Camailleux, so the blue tablecloth. Camailleux is a particular kind of print with blue and white that you find a lot in Provence, in the south of France. L'Espagnol, the Spanish woman with the tambourine, painted it in 1909. And at that time, he decides he wants to make a big decoration that's going to hang into the staircase that goes up to the apartments. So a very prominent piece. And so he sits with Matisse and he discuss the commission for the dance and for music. The two big paintings he's going to do. They had already one that is at the moment, but he wants that. And for that, Matisse is forced to rent a larger studio in Issy-les-Moulineaux to be able to set his two big canvases. And he buys more still lifes. And some figure, portrait woman in green. And finally, in 1910, comes the two canvases, the dance, which is the second version, but arrived there, and the music. Two important things. First, Matisse will find out when he comes to Moscow a couple of years later that he overpainted the genitals of the violinist because he didn't like it, and so he overpainted in red. And Matisse was furious, but he couldn't do anything. The thing too is neither of the paintings pleased Shchukin. He didn't like it, and for an interesting reason. He was at that time, he had electrical light in his house. And the electrical light made the dark background even darker. It looked like black. And so it was very disappointing for him. And at first he was going to refuse it. And then thinking about it, he finally accepted it and telling Matisse, I hope I will like it one day. He was known for some of the painting to try them before buying them. He would bring them home and keep them for a month or two and look at them and say, just like shoes, you know, are they okay or are they not? But he tried that. Then of course, he's seen Picasso, but he meets Braque, Georges Braque, and buys one of these early Braque Cubist painting. Braque and Picasso worked side by side, and sometimes it's almost impossible to see who did what, because the early Cubist paintings are very similar. And then he's going to buy André Derain, who is also going to do some semi-Cubist paintings, the ancient quarter in Cannes. And he starts liking Derain too. He's going to buy many of them. More Matisse, La Jeune Fille aux Tulipes. And this, by the way, is his daughter, the older daughter who was from a model he met before he married his wife. But then he decided to adopt her, to integrate her into the family, and then had two sons after that. You can always recognize Marguerite because she had a tracheotomy as a young child and had a scar, very prominent scar at the neck. And so when she's painted, she always had either a little scarf or a necklace or what that's going to hide the scar. He adored Marguerite. Marguerite and him got along beautifully. Portrait de la famille. So you can see Marguerite, and you can see the scar. So his wife, the two sons, playing chess. Then he did a series on the workshop of the painter. So l'atelier du peintre, and also called the pink atelier, the pink workshop, where he displays all kind of fabrics and artifacts that he brought back from Africa. He went to Africa at that time and brought back all the fabric that you see there on the screen, and other things, pots and so on. He brought back, and he absolutely used it in many, many ways in his still lives and other. This is another painting he did, the corner of the artist studio, and the same fabric you can see. And then the last one, which was Nasturtium and the Dance, where it's another dance than the one that he's going to give to sell to Shchukin. And these three are going to form a triptych. And so they were meant to be together. And so you can see that was the best way, because also we don't always understand how big these paintings are. But with the person there, we have an idea of the scale. And so you can see the one, the Atelier Rose in the middle, and the other two on either side. And that's reminiscent of the old triptychs you find in the 14th, 15th century, the altarpieces. And another still life. And this is when he finally convinces Matisse to come to Moscow. And Matisse is going to do the trek all the way to Moscow and rehang his own gallery. And so he has his own room, which is considered the pink room, where he is going to hang his paintings the way he wants, which means giving it some space in between the paintings. And you see Matisse there with the woman in green in Moscow. Here you see better. So you see the decor is still very Baroque Rococo. And then you have all these very modern paintings around. It's quite a contrast. So Schukin called this room fragrant and sometimes poisonous, but always beautiful hothouse of orchids. It became his favorite. And there you have some, no, these are still Matisse, and then you have the dance there on top. And once he hangs it there, there's more light, and he likes it better. In the staircase, it's a well. You don't have windows, especially, and so the background was very, very dark. In 1912, he goes on, but Matisse is almost finished. Mostly, he's going to have the coming 3 or 4. This is conversation, and you might say, what is that guy in a pajama? You know, they're in the middle of the day. Pajamas at that time were considered as lounge clothes. And so people would be in pajama in the house. Then the very interesting goldfish. While in Africa, he had noticed that there were goldfish balls everywhere. And people were fascinated by these goldfish and would sit and have their coffee, or they were smoking their aromatized water, watching these goldfish. And so he made this one, and Schukin really liked it. And we're going to see it coming back at another vase of irises. And then he moves to Cubism again. You have Picasso, the factory at Horta de Ebro, which is also an important moment where he went with Braque, by the way, when he painted that one. And that very interesting painting here of the fermier, the farmer, that is going to be influential on the young Russian painters like Goncharova. You can see the influence of the farmer onto the painting of Goncharova on the right. And then finally, one of his very favorite of Matisse is the Café Mo, the Arab coffee house. He loved it. This is a large painting also. So it's almost 2 meter by 2 meters. So 6 feet by 6 feet. So it's a large painting, but it's very peaceful. And he loved the serenity he could find with that painting. And you can see they're watching the goldfish. Here, the goldfish. And then he meets something, and I would not have expected that from him, but he meets the works of the douanier Rousseau. Henri Rousseau, who was that old gentleman that started painting that naive way. But on kind of late, he was in his 60s when he started painting, and he was a retired border agent. And douanier is just, oh, come on, how do you say that? Douanier, it's, what? Custom officer. And so, so that's why he's nicknamed the Douanier Rousseau. But he has that very naive way of painting, and he was quite protected by the Impressionists who liked very much. He was a nice guy, just gentle. And he bought a whole series of his works. This is the Jardin du Luxembourg. That's the view of the bridge in Sèvres and the hills of Clamart, Saint-Cloud, and Bellevue with biplane, balloon, and dirigible. And these were, of course, new stuff. You know, painted in 1908, the airplanes were just new. The dirigible were a little, the balloons were a little, hot air balloons, a little older because they go back to the end of the 18th century. But the dirigible was pretty new too. Then the muse inspiring the poet, and we're talking about the poet being Guillaume Apollinaire, the great friend of Picasso, and Marie Laurencin, who was a painter herself. She was much prettier than that, by the way. A view of Parc Montsouris, in view of the fortification to the left of the port of Vanves. And finally, more typical of what he was doing, the jaguar attacking a horse. He did a lot of these violent scenes, but in that very naive manner. In 1912, his brother Piotr decides finally to get married. And this is a big thing because he had a mistress. And suddenly he announces he's going to marry a very proper girl from a bourgeois family. And the mistress is furious. And so he has to keep paying her so that she doesn't make a scandal. And so he's in need of money. And he has about 6 paintings of Impressionists that he wants to sell, and de Ranruel doesn't want to give him the money that he wants. And so Sergei is going to give him 100,000 rubles for that, which was 3 times what de Ranruel was going to give him for the same paintings. And so suddenly these paintings that Piotr had bought are going to join the Schukin collection. And this is the one that Piotr had bought when Sergei bought another Pissarro. And then some Maurice Denis, also a symbolic painter. Some Monet, the lady in the garden in Saint-Adresse. The cliffs at Étretat. And a Renoir, a nude. And you see, he would not have bought that, but he bought it for his brother. And the Degas woman combing her hair. And as we say, he had bought already a couple of Picassos, and then he meets Daniel Kahnweiler, who is another art dealer born in Mannheim, from prosperous Jewish family, and who opened his first small art gallery in Paris in 1907. Very quickly, he's going to become very famous and is going to get in all the network of buyers and also of artists, and particularly Picasso. That's really what he centered. Interestingly enough, during the war, the Second World War, he stayed in France, but in hiding, and wasn't arrested. He sold Shchukin a whole series of blue period. This is the poet Sabartes, who became the secretary to Picasso for many, many years, completely surrendered his personality to Picasso, who had such a strong personality. La buveuse d'absinthe, so the absinthe drinker, that terrible drink that killed so many. The beautiful Two Sisters, or the Visitation, which is, here you can see his sketch, which is interesting because it shows how he masters the line so well, but is definitely inspired by El Greco, painting that he had seen. And in fact, it doesn't represent Mary and Elizabeth as the Visitation would imply, but in fact, it's a prostitute that is meeting her sister at the prison. But it's that early period of the blue when he lost his friend Casaremas and he's really depressed. The beautiful one of the old Jew and a boy. Very intense blue. And then the rose period, the lady of the Isle of Mallorca. And then he goes on with Matisse, particularly the paintings he made while, at least that he got the inspiration from in Morocco. These two that are pendants, Amido the Moroccan and Zohar standing, were meant to be this. And interestingly enough, he's inspired, the shape of it is inspired by the icons he saw in Moscow. That very narrow and long thing is something he saw while he discovered at the Tretiakov the icons that he had collected. And then another one here, the Moroccan in green. And finally, I think this one is the last Matisse he bought, which is probably one of the masterpieces too, is the portrait of the artist's wife. And poor thing, this is Madame Matisse, and she cried when she saw herself after being painted. Yeah, she did many times before he divorced her. He went on with Picasso, and here we have the Trois Femmes, the three ladies. The Dance of the Veils. And then a more regular, that's a painting that he did while he was in Spain with the typical porron, which is that vessel that you see in the middle there, that you drink it that way. So you never touch the spout, you just pour it and catch it the proper way, otherwise you're in trouble. Even some synthetic cubism, so collage. This is, I think, the last one he bought from him, the collage. So that was the later period of cubism, where he would paste things on top of others and have some, sometimes newspaper as a support, so that they would appear in between. And then Cézanne, the self-portrait, one of the most important self-portrait. Coming now to 1914, of course, this is just before the beginning of the First World War. by André Derain. He bought the portrait of a man with a newspaper. Sorry. And no, that is also a Picasso that he bought. And we don't have exactly the dates at the end because the archives disappeared. But this is the portrait of Ambroise Vollard, so of that art dealer that he was so close to. And you see here a picture of Ambroise Vollard. And it's probably one of the most readable Cubist paintings that he did, where you can really recognize Vollard in there. And one more of his synthetic Cubist paintings. So the Picasso painting became it was called the cell or the cave. It was put at the very end of all the other rooms, close to the private apartments. And only a few people were allowed to go there. And because people really resented that room, it was so outrageous for them. And so you can see here what Benoit said. Indeed, the impression produced by the Picasso room is truly hideous. Just an hour in the Cubist chapel and your eyes will begin to get accustomed to the novelty that would have frightened you so much, and your perception of the rest of the collection will have changed. And Schukin himself said, I'm sure he's right and I am wrong, which I thought was very modest. He also, with the collection of the Picasso, would have included some African sculpture. And these are two of the African sculpture that were part of the Shchukin collections that when you see that, you see the inspiration of Picasso on that simplicity, but the power that they imply. Because Picasso believed a lot in the power of these statues that were revered by the people who made them and who worshiped them. And he could feel that power. He was very sensitive to that. So he bought a few more Derain. He became quite infatuated with Derain, who never achieved the rank of Matisse and Picasso, but is interesting too. So in summary, in 1914, he remarries. He had fallen in love with first, he was not a widow, but separated from Scriabin, who is a great Russian composer. And Scriabin left for another woman and left his wife with her parents and 4 kids. And he really became in love with her. And her parents had said, if you ever go away with another man, you dead. And so but she didn't reciprocate the love that he had for her either. So he tried, then Scriabin died. And so he could have remarried, and parents were still, no, you're not having another man. And so he felt rejected and decided to go for one of the friends of Vera Scriabin, Nadezhda Konus, who was quite a bit younger, but was divorced or widow. So he bought works to a total of 258 paintings decorating the walls of his palatial home in Moscow. 1914, Schukin owned 13 Monet, 3 Renoir, 3 Degas, 8 Cézanne, 4 Van Gogh, 16 Gauguin, 7 Henri Rousseau, 41 Matisse, 51 actually Picasso, 16 Derain, plus many others of smaller painters that I'm not adding. Plus, he bought some avant-garde Russian painting too. His mansion became this in so he fled, and that was interesting. He fled in 1918, I think. And his wife and their daughter, they had a daughter, he had a daughter with his second wife, fled separately, disguised, jumped on a train with fake ID, and were able to leave Russia to Germany. And a few days later, he did the same with his son, the remaining son, left was again, and they left everything behind. Absolutely everything behind. He must have had some gold or some other thing because he survived really well when he arrived in Paris. Went to Germany, and then from Germany to Switzerland, and then France. Moved first to the south in the Mediterranean for a few years. Matisse, who lived there, to try to rekindle their friendship, but he had stopped collecting. And then he moved back to Paris, where he died in 1936. So his mansion became the State Museum of New Western Art in 1922. In 1928, his collection and the one of Morozov, who is a contemporary collector who collected some extraordinary Impressionist painting and post-Impressionist painting, they were merged and exhibit in Morozov mansion, which was already too small for his collection. In 36, Shchukin died in Paris. In 48, the State Museum of New Western Art was closed down by Stalin due to its allegedly bourgeois and cosmopolitan character. And finally, in 55, they put together these collections and, in hiding almost, split the collection between the Pushkin and the Hermitage. And that was done randomly. Some of the works, unfortunately, that should have been together, like the pair of Moroccan things, are in the two different museums. And that's really sad. And so it's different. And so since then, they are split between the Pushkin and this. So let me show you. So you have the Pushkin on the left and the Hermitage on the right. Now, as I mentioned, the Louis Vuitton Foundation a few years ago made that big exhibition in Paris of the Schukin collection, gathering not everything, but a good part of it. And I just want to show you where the foundation is. It's in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris. It's a very, very, very modern. It was very controversial when it was built, and you will understand right away why. Because it's in the middle of the Bois de Boulogne, and there it is. And it comes out really special. They had to keep the level a little down, but it's built by Frank Gehry. And if you know Gehry, you know, I know I have an architect there. So Frank Gehry, you know, with this very special, he's the Disney Philharmony in LA, the Guggenheim in Bilbao. And here is the Louis Vuitton Foundation, which has become a center for the art, modern art in Paris, where they just do exhibition. They don't especially have a collection, permanent collection, but they bring in these big shows. And so it's incredible because there is, if you go to the Louis Vuitton Foundation, there is a time, how do you call it, when it's a time lapse video that shows how they build it. It's fascinating to see how he does. And another view of it. And so they had this. So if you go to Paris, don't miss the Louis Vuitton Foundation. The catalog is there. The year after the Schukin, they had Morozov with a similar exhibition. And they both published these kind of catalogs. I have the Morozov, which if I'm still alive, will do in 2 years. And but these are the only books you can find on Schukin and on Morozov. It's quite extraordinary. So he is buried in the Montmartre cemetery. Here is his tomb. And as the director of the Pushkin Museum stated, he started to collect unpopular art, which was snubbed by the Louvre and other museums. It was his personal taste. Perhaps he heard foreshocks that would change the world. Such a collector could appear only in a country that awaited a revolution. He collected art that prefigured the global cataclysm. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I think it's heavy, but I think it's so, we've been kept, why you don't know about Schukin is because of politics, because the Russia was so estranged from what we were doing. Politically, it was out, and now we're coming back to discovering these incredible people that had that idea to really, it was not, I buy it for me, it was buying for the others. And we'll see the same thing with Barnes when we see the next collection presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be gone next Tuesday, actually. I'll be almost in the plane. And I'll come back on the 9th of April. So my proposal is that we take the 2 talks that I'm going to miss and we put them in May. I don't know how many of you will be gone in May, but we'll just set them the 3rd Tuesday and the last Tuesday of May. We'll have Donatello and then the Holbein, the ambassadors, that will be at the end. So here you see that when I come back, we'll have the Barn collection on the 15th of April, and we'll have on the 28th, de la Croix, the Arab skirmishing in the mountain, and then the Cézanne, which was scheduled on the 6th of May. So I hope you have enjoyed. Let me stop the recording.